Yep.
Okay. Well, okay, I think we are right at 12:30. Thank you all for joining us. There's a lot of people joining us today, so I'm really pleased about that. This is our first Beam meeting of the semester. Beam, if you aren't familiar, this is a club some students started a few years ago, and it stands for business, entrepreneurship, accounting, and marketing, but also includes office and medical office along with it. And so we're just happy to have you here. And every year we've been trying to format this a little bit differently with the pandemic. We used to meet on campus, but this has actually worked fairly well, meeting by Zoom. Not sure why I can't hear. Okay, I'll finish it. But anyways, we'll make introductions and then I'll try and troubleshoot the audio. I'm Lynn Smogard. I teach, many of you probably are in my classes. I recognized a lot of names. I teach marketing at the college. And actually, if you didn't know, I was actually a student at the college, just like you were, and was so impressed that I decided that I was going to go into education. And I taught on and off for a number of years at the college, but have been there as a full-time faculty member since 2008. And so then I'll turn it over to Kavi to make introductions while I try and figure out why some people's audio is not working.
Well, thanks, Lynn. Hi, everybody. My name is Kavi Turnbull. I see some familiar names in here as well who are in my classes. Thanks for joining. I teach in the business and the marketing departments at Century. This is my 8th year. I can't believe how long or how fast time flies. I specialize in entrepreneurship. So that's one of the things we're going to definitely touch on today. And we're using Beam this fall to kind of help me as I launch an entrepreneurship channel. And I just want to tell you a little bit of the motivation behind it is I have an undergraduate and an MBA in entrepreneurship, and I've been a serial entrepreneur. I've founded 5 different companies. And some of the educational materials, they're good, but they just don't touch on every single thing that you need to know as an entrepreneur. And so that's why I started this YouTube channel, and I am trying to hit topics that the traditional textbooks don't tell you everything about. And so yeah, that's what we're going to talk about today. Thanks for joining.
So do we want to do introductions or just start off with some questions?
Maybe we could. How many people do we have on here?
Looks like 20, about 20.
Oh, wow.
I know that's the biggest group we've had so far.
Maybe we should, that's a lot to do intros. Maybe we should have them raise hand or type into the chat box what department you're from, just so we kind of can read them off here and see where everyone's coming from. Accounting and business, welcome Douglas. Business, Christy. Finance, marketing, accounting, business, entrepreneurship.
Oh, nice mix.
Accounting.
Oh, Marissa.
Yeah.
Crystal.
Excellent. Well, we have quite the range of students here.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
So I don't know, Lynn, how do you want to kick it off? Do you want me to? I give a quick summary of the video.
Sure, that would be great. And then I think what we're gonna do is if Kavi can give a quick summary, and then for those who maybe didn't get a chance to watch it, and then while he's giving the summary, why don't you come up with questions to ask, and we'll just kind of dive right into that if that's okay.
Perfect. Well, yeah, thanks for watching the video, and any feedback and ideas you have, please throw my way, everybody. I'm just very new at this and learning. As you saw in the video, I talked about one of my startups, iCrimeFighter, and the process of raising money. And the reason I really want to make this video is because I hear a lot of entrepreneurs struggle when they're trying to raise money. One of the favorite activities when I had entrepreneurship in person on campus was an activity where I would give students case studies of 8 different businesses, and they had to pick how they were going to get the money to start their business. And there are many different ways: loans, investors, crowdfunding, financing from a bank. And so this is one that people love to talk about. The news is always featuring startups who raise money from external investors. And there's kind of a mystery around how to do it. Even if you go to school, you read like I did, get degrees, you learn from case studies how other entrepreneurs did it, but it can be difficult. They don't always tell you the ins and outs. And that's what I wanted to kind of touch on in that video. And that's where I wanted to kind of throw it open to questions and let and answer, what kind of burning questions students and budding entrepreneurs might have. So with that, I think I can throw it open to questions.
Does anyone want to be brave and go first with a question?
Lynn, do you want them to type it into the chat, or how do you want them to?
Sure. Okay, so Sonia asks, when did you know you wanted to become an entrepreneur? Well, that's a good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I was lucky enough my first job when I was 15, I worked in an electronics factory in Minnetonka, and it was my mom's best friend from high school. And he had started a company that kind of grew to be pretty successful called Lynn Power Systems, and they made power inverters. And I just saw that guy, his name was Leroy, kind of could do whatever he wanted because he had created his own company. And I was in the warehouse packaging these power inverters going out in Minnesota hot and humid summers at 95 degrees at 15, thinking, oh, I want to be like him one day. And so I was lucky. Many of you probably don't have that close personal connection. And that's what I try to replicate in my classes, is to show students that they can become entrepreneurs and that there is a path to becoming an entrepreneur, because it's not always obvious. Unless you have a parent, an uncle, or a family friend like I had, it might not have hit your radar, and you probably just laser focused on something else. So I was lucky and knew from a very young age.
There's a lot of great questions here. Clea asks, how did you find investors for the various businesses you started?
That's a great question. So it's not easy. It's almost with anything in life. The first is always going to be the hardest. And the first company I raised money for was my failure of the 5, called drivealternatives.com. It was a company where we were crowdsourcing locations of electric charging stations and different types of ways to fuel your car. And we had an iPhone app out back in the day, when way before all of your time. This company launched in 2007. So we were on the first iTunes market and learning about how to make apps a long time ago. But to raise money for that company was difficult. I remember I had 34 different meetings before I got the first yes. So you really have to have thick skin and be and persevere on raising money. It's not easy. But my advice to budding entrepreneurs is, what's the worst that can happen? The worst thing that can happen is they'd say no. So it's really not that bad. So that's all you have to get through your head. And then basically I set out looking for funds that invested into startup companies, and then basically wealthy individuals who were registered in these funds, or registered as what's called, I don't talk about it in the video, but it's called an accredited investor. An accredited investor has a net worth of over $2 million, or they make over $250,000 a year. when you're raising money for startups like these, you're supposed to only raise from accredited investors. Why? It's because if the company fails, that person has enough wealth to recover. And back in the day when the Great Depression happened, like companies were raising money from just anybody and everybody. And so we had to create something called the SEC to protect the general public from basically snake oil salesmen. Have any of you watched American Greed? That's that's basically what we're trying to protect from, and why we have the SEC is there's a lot of scam artists out there, and I'm not a criminal, so I haven't run into problems raising money. It's getting the company, that first investor and that first company going. The the two times after raising money were quite easy, actually.
That's great. I also had a follow-up that we had discussed the other day is what do investors look for in a startup, do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. And if we could poll the students right now, I have a feeling I know what they would say. And they would say the idea, because everybody jumps on, it's the idea that investors want to invest in. And yeah, that's part of it. But the number one factor is the team, because a good team can take a okay idea and make it a home run, where a really bad team will take an amazing idea and tank it into the ground. And investors know that. So what they're looking for is like a well-rounded team, people who have different core competencies. So I would mean
Nina, I think we're recording this, so I will readily share that with people.
I think, Lynn, you can mute that mic so it doesn't.
Can I? Let me find it. Oh, there we go.
There we go. So you're going to want a well-rounded team, people with different backgrounds. So that would mean like a business person, an engineering person, a salesperson. Or you wouldn't want all the same people on a team. So like Lynn and I pitching startup investors probably wouldn't look that great because we have very similar backgrounds.
But we would be enthusiastic.
We'd be a great team. Maybe just not for investors.
Right. Okay, Crystal asked, how do you create a good pitch deck?
Oh, that's a great idea. Great question.
I know, very good.
I follow, there's a guy named Guy Kawasaki, and he was one of the founders of Apple. And he created all the 10 slides that you need in a pitch. And it's like a template that is the best template I've ever seen. So I can send you a link to that after the class. We can share that. I use it in my entrepreneurship class for those of you who are in the class. And basically, when you get a chance to pitch these investment funds or investors, you're really only talking maybe 15 to 20 minutes. That's it. And then probably 20 minutes of Q&A. And so you have to be really quick. You can't dilly-dally.
I think I found it, Kavi. I'm gonna put it in the chat for folks, that Guy Kawasaki. He is excellent.
Very cool.
So let me find the next question. Good question there, Crystal. How do you know what kind of company you're going to start? Oh, that's good. Do ideas just pop into your head, or do you search for good ideas for a company?
Okay, and if you look at my background, and for those of you who don't know, I did the car company startup that failed. I then did iCrimeFighter, the hosting for law enforcement. I bought, grew, and sold a raw dog food company. I own a kombucha brewery, and I've started and sold a digital agency once, and now I've started another one where we have 3 employees. So those ideas are all over the place. And many of the folks you probably know in your family have had 1 or 2 jobs in the same industry. I tend to hop. So, but that doesn't mean I'm doing it completely blindly, hopefully. uh, I have a lot of ideas and I research them and they don't always work. And so what I'm looking for is honestly, it depends on the stage of life you're in. When you're earlier in your career, you can take more risk. As you're at the middle of the career, you can take less risk because you might be starting a family or have kids. And when you're at the end of your career, you can take more risk again. So early in the career, I was looking for something that was very risky that could blow up and be worth a lot of money. Those are venture businesses that take in external funding. Uh, at this point, I'm a little less risky, a little more old man business types where you're looking at real estate, and I've done 2 real estate deals now, things that are a little less risky, more probable to make money, but less probable to make a ton of money. And then later on in the career, you look for things that maybe will blow up again. And so, yeah, I am just always out on the lookout. And I have a video coming out about how I found Golden Acres, the pet food company. I actually bought that company on Craigslist. And I got that idea because I met a guy who bought a company where he was installing and taking down for sale signs for homes in the Madison, Wisconsin area. And he was paying for his PhD just installing and taking down signs. So I can't give credit for looking for businesses on Craigslist, but I will tell you there's a lot of garbage on Craigslist. It took me 2 years of looking every month to find something that was interesting. And so when I'm looking at the good ideas, at that point in my life, I wanted something stable, so it had recurring revenue. You have to feed your dog every single month, so the customers were coming back to buy the food. And I wanted something that had history and a proprietary product. That's how I found that company.
Ashley asks, in your video, you mentioned that it took over 10 years for your product to grow. At any point, did you feel like your product was not worth the time or thought it would not work out? What made you stick with it throughout the time? Well, that's a good question too.
It's a great question, and I didn't stick with it. I left the company. So I thought that company was going to go under about 3 different times, and one of the times I was the CEO of the company, and it was stressful. Working with law enforcement and first responders is not easy, especially introducing a brand new product to the marketplace. What's an interesting point about that this question hits on is what really made our company take off was competition. When Taser, the company that makes the electric guns that shock you, they came out with a product called evidence.com. It does exactly what iCrimeFighter does, but it also has proprietary body cams that uploads the data to the cloud. When that company came out, it actually, we were all like, oh God, here, we're dead. You know, a big company coming out with the exact same thing. But what happened was they brought credibility to the marketplace because all the police chiefs knew Taser and their prices were crazy high. And so when the police chief saw, Taser's doing this, okay, I trust what iCrimeFighter is doing. Because before that, we would get a lot of resistance. And after that, the sales came a lot easier. So honestly, I really thought that company was going to go out of business several times, and it didn't, knock on wood. We just had a really good team that was able to be flexible and kind of move the product around to what the clients wanted and change the pricing. And now it's a really big company. I mean, there's over 300 law enforcement agencies on the software, and it's the second largest evidence host in the world. So it's, it came quite away from me writing. I was literally at a Starbucks in Uptown meeting the police officers, writing down what they wanted and sketching out the app 10 years ago. So it's kind of crazy that where it's come from.
Yeah, I've known Kavi for 8 years, and I would tell anyone, it's like just observing him. He's a master of the 2 P's. That's pivoting and perseverance. So, whether it's, I remember the story of it was a refrigerator unit that had gone out and there was the dog food in it, and you were there helping those people clean out that refrigerator. So Entrepreneurs have interesting lives.
Yeah, there's no prima donnas in entrepreneurship. You have to do, and Lynn's talking about a dog kennel that had a huge freezer of mine that had food in it, and some employee unplugged it and it went bad, and oh my gosh, yeah. I was there cleaning out a big freezer with maggots in it, so.
Perseverance.
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay. Oh, I've lost. Sorry about that. I lost it for a second. So Sonia asked, what do you find most challenging about being an entrepreneur? What do you enjoy most about being an entrepreneur?
Well, when you're younger, most challenging is the self-discipline of like, you got to get up and make things happen. There's nobody who's gonna push you. There's a saying, nobody goes to bed worried, lying there thinking about what's best for you at night. And it's you. You have to do it. And what's challenging about that too is there really isn't a book of how to run your business in every aspect. And one funny story is I was delivering like $500 of food to this barn of dog food, and I had our big freezer truck and drove in, and I knew the customer wasn't at home, and she had said just put it in the barn. So I opened the barn, put the food in there, came back out, and there was a goat on the top of my truck. My truck is high, and that thing was 10-foot high freezer truck. I have a picture I use in some of the entrepreneurship classes. And I'm from Circle Pines, like I'm the northern suburbs. I don't know how to get a goat off the top of my truck. And so I'm sitting there like talking to it, yelling at it, it's not moving. And I thought, how the heck do I get it off? And food. And so I went into the barn, found whatever looked like goat food. It was some sort of oats, put it on the ground, and the goat ran down. And I tied it to the fence there and drove off fast before it could get back up. I texted the customer that her goat was tied to the tree. But that's the most challenging thing is you're not, you Google how do you get a goat off the top of your truck? I don't know what shows up. There wasn't even cell phone service at that place. And so that's also floats into what I like most about being an entrepreneur is there's never a dull moment in anything I do. There's always a challenge, always something new to learn. And you can't get bored being an entrepreneur.
Very good. Kara asks, do you feel like when you first started, crowdfunding was the best way to find the seed money or backing? Do you feel like you would have ventured down this route before crowdfunding, as it likely would have been much harder?
So crowdfunding is actually, I'm probably older than you all think. Crowdfunding is new to me. When I was starting out as an entrepreneur, Kickstarter did not exist. There was no platforms like it. So I was basically raising money from wealthy individuals, having lunches and coffees and talking to them. And the key is, I got those 34 no's, but every time they said no, I would ask why. And so I would take notes of like, okay, so John didn't like this investment because XYZ. And then I would kind of change my pitch or have an answer for the next time around. Well, honestly, after that first time, the next two times I raised money, I barely got any no's. It was super easy. It was the first time is almost always the hardest.
I have a question that kind of goes along with that. I've seen a lot of, in fact, we were just talking about it, that there's a lot of, it seems like funding available. Even Mark Lamoni, he even offers some funding for ideas. So you can find grants and you can find those online. What do you think of those? Well, even like Muskie Tank, that I suppose qualify too.
No, I think grants and competitions are great. So student competitions for business plans, they get you ready to be able to talk to investors or bankers, and they also give you a lot of credibility. So if you have that on your resume, it just helps with if you want a job, or if you're going to present that business to a bank or investor, they're going to take it much more seriously if you placed in a business competition. So I did that a lot when I was in undergrad and graduate school.
Very cool. Doug asks, when starting or creating your company, what were your biggest unforeseen issues that you encountered? Not finding employees, paying people, generating demand for the app, etc. So what were some of the biggest unforeseen issues?
Pretty much everything you think is going to happen won't happen, and then the stuff and so yeah, any and all of that. We had problems with lots of things. The apps having bugs, not working. Finding good employees is tough when you're a startup because you don't have money to pay for, I use the sports analogy of the companies with a lot of money can play with the A team. I'm a master at playing with the C team. And so I'm the captain of the people who, what we call scrappy or bootstrapping. We don't have a lot of money, but we got a lot of spirit. And so we put together a team where usually what you're doing is you're giving some stock, and that stock is going to be given to the employees on what's called a vesting schedule. So let's say I hire Lynn and I don't want I can't pay Lynn's full salary, but I can pay 75% of it, but I don't want her to leave within 6 months or a year. So what I do is give her stock to make up the difference of that salary. And then I say to her, if I'm nice, I say one year and it's all yours, but most companies would be 3 or 5 years. And then she gets that stock. And yeah, I've had problems with all of those. Generating demand for the app, making that, paying that people, it's tough any which way. And then, what happened with iCrimeFighter, I don't talk about in the video, is just the whole licensing or like the government approval of where evidence can be stored. That just came out of nowhere. And all of a sudden we had to be at the state capitol and with presenting why our service was good. And what was interesting, I was CEO of iCrimeFighter at the time. I talked to Amazon, and Amazon sent 5 people from Washington to go to the state capitol with me and talk about why their GovCloud is safe enough for Minnesota law enforcement to use.
Very cool. It's funny you told that story. I knew somebody once who they were living in California, and I think their spouse was going to work for a little startup there, and they couldn't afford to pay the salary, so they were going to give stock, but they turned it down, and that little company was Google. So
oh no,
sometimes it can be well worth that. Also tell them the story. I always think of this when we're putting together a SWOT analysis as like these unforeseen threats. I remember with the pet food business, I think it was the bird flu, or what was it with the turkeys? There was something that was like a major pivot, like getting, it was a supply chain issue.
Yeah, that happens a lot. So you have to be ready to pivot. And it's actually happening right now because I work with Raw Bistro, a major pet food company in Minnesota. We manage their social media and do their digital. And right now there's a shortage on grass-fed lamb. And so they're having to pivot to bison, which honestly, I would have thought bison was more money, but it's not. So you just have to be flexible when you're running a small business.
There's that word again, pivot. So here's another good question. What other ways have you raised, did I ask this? What other ways have you raised money other than from investors? Did I ask that?
Yeah, not yet. Well, if it's just from investors, there's different types. There's like different ways you can sell stock. That's probably getting too into the weeds here. But I've raised money with commercial loans. I've had 2 different commercial loans. And I talk about it in the video. I don't know if that one's live on YouTube yet, but when you take out a commercial loan, there's something called a personal guarantee. So if you ask the bank for, let's just say $100,000 for your company, if your company goes out of business, they want that $100,000. They're not going to just write it off. So if anyone who owns more than 20% of a company, in my experience, the bank is going to ask for a personal guarantee. That means if the company fails, they're coming after you. So your house, your car, your assets, whatever you have to pay that money back. And, there's something called the golden rule of finance, and that's whoever has the gold makes the rules. So I can't really, there's nothing you can do. I had to sign both times, and yeah, it's stressful. But where there's risk, there's reward. And I really like being an entrepreneur, so I didn't have a problem signing the times I've done it. The only real way I haven't done in the 8 ways in the case study that I created that I can share with all of you is I have not crowdfunded myself. I've helped people crowdfund and do a Kickstarter campaign, but none of my own personal companies have I done that.
Interesting. Let's see. Zoe asks, I know you touched on it briefly, but can you elaborate on how you determined what your business's valuation? What was the business valuation?
Okay. So this is a great question, because when you're out in the real world, it's a lot different than when you're at the university. In classes, they're going to teach you like 5-10 different ways to do a business valuation, where you're looking at assets and sales and liabilities, and you can do all that fancy stuff and cash flow analysis for 10 years or whatever. But when you're really a startup company, especially like iCrimeFighter, how does that really, what holds water? Are you really going to sell what you say? And we did not, and no one does. Everyone always has just overly optimistic expectations. So the best way to do a business valuation is actually relative to other startups when you are raising money for a tech startup. This does not count for like pet food or a accounting business or a car shop. I'm talking about businesses that raise money from external investors. What that means is, like, think about your house. When you value your house, how do you know how much it's worth? What do you look to first? You look at the neighbor's house, then you look at the other neighbor's house. You look at comparables. So in the marketplace at the time, iCrimeFighter was so long ago that when other entrepreneurs watch that video, they're gonna think I am crazy that I raised at such a low valuation. But that was the case. In Minnesota at the time, $1 million valuation for a startup idea that had a good team and had a decent market that it could attack was about $1 million. Today's market is crazy. I have no idea what it is, probably $5-10 million. And so you're giving up way less of the company for a lot more money than what I had to do 10 years ago. So yeah, the valuations completely depend on the type of business. So if you're talking about a resort, that's going to be based on the property and the sales. If you're talking about a startup that's raising out external funds, you really need to find a company similar to figure out how much it's worth.
So Aaron asked this, and it's related to that, and maybe you covered this. It says, how does one value a company in terms of a groundbreaking app or technology with potential, as opposed to a commodity with physical goods and sales?
That's kind of like what I just hit on. So the groundbreaking apps, you need to look at the other companies like it, what kind of valuations they have gotten. And like Ubers of the world and they call them unicorn startups because they have billion-dollar valuations. To be honest, I don't really understand how that's possible, because in the end, the investor always has to make a return. Otherwise, they're not going to invest in your company. So, and I think I said in the video, they're looking for like really big returns. 5 times their money back is on the low end. They're looking for 10 to 20 times. And so these people who are investing, they're investing in a lot of companies, because that doesn't happen very often. If they invest in 20 companies, there are probably going to be 2 or 3 that knock it out of the park, maybe. And there'll be 5 that do okay. And then there will be the rest who just die. So iCrimeFighter, we're in the knock it out of the park category if it was fast, but it took 10 years. So that's lowering the ROI, the return on investment. But for the founders, we're in a great spot. The investors probably would have liked it to be quicker. But hey, what can you do?
What's the biggest lesson you learned or took from your first startup company that wasn't successful to your iCrimeFighter startup?
That's a great question. The first company we had one big client, and we were just focused on pleasing that one big client, and it went away in a matter of a week. And so I had to then pivot the whole company. And basically, what happened was we were making these apps for cars and on the iPhone and Android market, some of the first people doing it. And so people in the Minneapolis market were contacting me and be like, hey, you have a really cool iPhone app, Android app. Do you develop apps for other people? And I was always like, no, we don't do that. And then the day after we lost that big customer, I was like, oh yeah, I do that. So that's actually, and that's how I ran into the iCrimeFighter people. Was that company was shutting down because we lost our contract. And I started working with making other apps. I made fishing apps, bass apps. I made a racing app. And I ran into these police officers looking to make an app. And that's how that all happened.
Interesting. That's a good story. Okay, so this is a good one. What advice would you give to someone who is young and trying to become an entrepreneur? The other thing I would add to that are like, what qualities do you think are important to develop or to have as an entrepreneur?
That's a good question. So, that's another timing question, because anyone who knows me really well knows that I really wanted to start a whiskey distillery for quite some time. And if you look at my resume, I still don't have a whiskey distillery. Why? Because you have to age whiskey for it to be good. And it takes a long time to get a whiskey distillery going, and aging whiskey and then selling whiskey and branding it. And so basically, at the time I was trying to start the whiskey distillery, I bought the pet food company. And the pet food company had revenue coming in day one, and I didn't have to wait. It was cash flowing on day one, and I could just hit the gas and accelerate and change things up. So, don't get too focused on that first business of it has to be your ideal business. I want to open a beer brewery. Opening a brewery costs $500,000. So focus on something simple. My first business was in college at the U of M. We don't have a video about that. I really should make one, where we basically in a class called Entrepreneurship in Action. If you go to the U of M after Century, you have to start and run a business in the class. And me and four teammates created a business called the U Guide, where at the time when you moved into the U of M, there were 10,000 dorm beds, and each residential advisor had to put 32 pieces of marketing on your bed. They were like, buy tickets to the Gophers, go to Boynton Health Service. There's just all these flyers. And we were like, this is a waste of time and paper. And so we made a magazine called the U Guide, where it was a guide to on campus for new students. And then in the back, those 34 flyers became coupons. And we sold a lot. It was like over $80,000 of revenue we had selling those ads. And when you're 21 or 20 and you have $80,000 in your account, it's pretty fun. So that was an idea that took zero cash to start up, and it was successful right away.
Very cool. Okay, everybody, you all get a gold star for fantastic questions. Nina asks, what are your thoughts about joint entrepreneurs? I think she means partnerships, or would you just recommend being a single entrepreneur? That's a good question too.
Yeah, no, being a single entrepreneur is tough, especially in the beginning, because you have to have that self-motivation, and you have to, it's a tough thing. So being in a partnership is actually easier. And most of my businesses have been in partnerships. Only two of them have been just me solely. And so I would actually recommend having a partner for your first business. However, there's a video coming out about this. I already filmed it, about the number one mistake people make when they have a partnership. It's dividing the company 50-50, because usually it's not, 50-50 efforts towards the company. And it's okay if you do it, but if you do it, then you have to have the provision of what happens when there's a disagreement. Because if there's no operating agreement in place that says, if the two partners are fighting on what the answer to this, problem is, what the company needs to do, the company can become at an impasse and just shut down. And at some point, those founders are like, somebody's going to want out at some point. And so how do you pay that person who wants to leave and buy the company? You have to put all those things into a legal document. I actually have that document right now on donkavi.com/free. And you can download an operating agreement from one of my companies to look at and see what was in there. But there's a video coming out about that soon.
And Ziamara says commercial loans video is coming out in a few days, so stay tuned. Court asks, what kind of job or career were you working before you started your first company or startup? Were you working full-time while creating your startup? And when did you decide to transition to your startup as a full-time job?
That's a great question. So my first jobs out of the U of M, I actually worked on political campaigns. I worked on a US Senator campaign and then a gubernatorial campaign. It's kind of like a startup. And basically you work on selling an idea, which is the candidate. And then it all comes down to one day. And both times I lost. So I was not very good at that. But I got a lot of experience of being very frugal and launching an idea. And I've always been a pretty passionate person and pretty, activist. And so I like that part of it. And it kind of goes well with being an entrepreneur and being a startup entrepreneur. And so what happened was that company called the U Guide, I left that company that I started as a student to work in politics. And the partners at that company grew the company and sold it. And one of them went down to Chile and lived in South America for like a year. I was like, God, because I had given away the equity in that company. I didn't really, and I was like, that's cool. I want to do that. So then I went back to school later on to hone my entrepreneurship skills. And I came out raising money for a startup. There's a brief time I had like a year, I worked in marketing for a company, but I've been pretty laser focused on entrepreneurship my entire life. And so, I think that I credit it all back to that job as a 15-year-old. I just saw someone who could do what he wanted to do in life. I was like, that's what I want to have. And, if you dedicate yourself to doing it and you put in the time and effort, anyone can do it. That's what's cool.
Great. Just a few questions as we kind of wind down. Looking back, is there anything that you would do differently or change?
In the career of startups, I mean, in the startups, oof, there's a lot of things that come up that you would do differently. But one thing to do is just make sure you have every seat on the team that you need if you're raising money. With the police, it wasn't totally apparent that we didn't have a full team at the beginning. And then we rushed and filled out the team with the chief technical officer and everything. And so that was one thing that held us up a little bit. Career-wise, I was lucky, and so I'm speaking to mostly youth students these days, is tuition has gone way up. And when I was at the U, I was able to work full time and pay for my education. When I got my MBA, I had a 75% scholarship, and so I was able to work. And I did graduate with student debt, but not a crazy amount. When I look at the student debt numbers today, it's super high. And so that's why all of you are making a really great decision by going to Century and not spending too much on your education, especially in the first few years. Because if you ask me what's the number one hindrance to becoming an entrepreneur, it's debt. Because if you have a lot of debt, how are you going to launch a company and do all this stuff? You're going to be worried about paying your loans, your all of your debt. And so personal financial skills are very necessary when being an entrepreneur. And so I was lucky. So I'm just trying to forewarn folks here that be mindful of how much that student loan payment will be after you graduate, because that is going to limit your possibilities on what jobs you have to take and if you can launch that company that you've always wanted to.
Great advice. So that's really great advice. So is there any other advice you would offer for someone who's wanting to start a new business?
Oh, I'd see. This is a great one. Kara just put in find a mentor.
Find a mentor.
That's the answer to that. I had plenty of mentors throughout my career, and that's why I try and help as many students as possible. And at the U of M, there's actually a mentor program, and so I was partnered up with a really talented entrepreneur who had sold companies, and once a month we would go out to lunch for 2 years, junior and senior year while I was at the U. And so I learned a lot from him, and it was that's what, really gave me the expertise to be able to pitch later on.
Great. So this is probably the last question. And to Kavi, you can, pitch any upcoming videos, and then we'll schedule another Beam meeting for October, and you can come with your questions, because I think this has worked really well. It's been super interesting. But I will also ask everybody who is attending, you can either put it in the chat or you can just tell us. What other entrepreneurship topics would you find helpful? And then Kavi, you can also share any upcoming videos that are going to be available.
Cool. Yeah, I have a house hacking video. I bought a place that was basically it's like a triplex. It was 2 office units and an apartment. I turned it into 2 apartments and an office. And so I talk about that because, on YouTube, I see other people talking about house hacks and all these things to save money, but I never really saw a great example. And so they say what kind of what to do, but never give you a true example of the cost and how to do it. And so that's one. It's out now. It's house hacking, how I bought a house. And then there's another one coming out about how I bought and sold a company, the Golden Acres Pet Food. So if you subscribe and stay tuned to what's going on YouTube, I have 2 videos coming out every week for this whole semester, and I'll do it in the spring semester as well.
Very cool. So anybody have any additional questions or suggestions for topics for future videos?
And you can email me at
Sure.
kavi.turnbull@century.edu if you have other questions or comments to add.
Alan says, lots of great information. Thank you.
Oh, perfect. Glad I could help. So hopefully these are helpful. That's the whole idea.
I like the stories. I think the stories are very vivid. Oh, you should make a video on good markets to study, invest on.
That's a good one.
Well, and actually I tell students, well, whether you're in accounting, business, marketing, I think becoming skilled in trend tracking and trend watching can be very helpful. And that's just noticing what's happening in the marketplace. And that's just as you go, as you're, watching the news or, online or out shopping, what are some things that you're noticing that could potentially be a business? Or like Jim Mishik used to use a footstool. We he would come talk to our students, and he would always put out his footstool, and it was always in the way, and students would walk around it or walk over it. But every once in a while, a student would pick it up and move it. Or one time a student picked it up and put her backpack on it. And anybody who did that, he would give them $100. And his point was that the things that really bother you as you're going about your day-to-day could potentially be a business.
That makes sense. That's so true. Just being aware of your surroundings. And Kara has a question on how to build connections. I just want to say that honestly, your fellow students are probably the best connections out there, because you do not know where everybody's going to go when you're in school. And then I turn 38 soon. And some of my friends, if I look through my network, I have 3 friends who are now in charge of venture capital funds. You know,
Wow.
like it's like, and if they pick up the phone if I call. And so we had no idea when we were at Thursday night happy hour in school that that's what was going to happen, you know. And one is in charge of the new Minnesota Twins venture program where they invest in 10 startups a year. You just don't know. We just all had very similar interests in business and startups. And so the folks that you meet while you're at college, stay in good connection with them, because it's going to build your business network to all over the place.
Great advice. Anything else? Well, I'm going to give a big clap. So if you have any questions, you can email Kavi. If you have any, topics that you think would be good future videos, please send those his way. And well, we hope to see you all at our next Beam meeting.
Yeah, thanks so much. I appreciate all the great questions, and we'll see you next time.
Yep, and I'll try and post this video in D2L so you have access to it.
Perfect. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.